The scriptures do teach that when someone dies, they go to hell, but the commonly accepted belief is that hell is a fiery place of eternal torment, and that is a grave error. To begin, we must keep in mind that the Old Testament was written in Hebrew and the New Testament in Greek. So in order to really understand what the original authors were trying to express, we need to go back to the original Greek and Hebrew. The word hell is an English word that was sometimes selected by English translators to express the Hebrew word Sheol, and in the Greek, the words Hades, Gehenna, and Tartaru. In Old English usage, the word hell simply meant to conceal, to hide, and to cover, hence a concealed, hidden, or covered place. It was also common to use the word in reference to helling potatoes, which meant putting potatoes into pits, and also helling of a house, which meant to cover or thatch it. So when translators wanted to convey the word Sheol and Hades, meaning grave and pit, they used the term hell, which represented a secret, hidden condition of death. The Hebrew word Sheol occurs 65 times in the Old Testament. In the King James Version, it is translated hell 31 times, grave 31 times, and pit 3 times. It is interesting to observe that in the texts where the idea of torment would be out of the question, the translators of the King James Version chose to use the words grave or pit. In all the other verses, they use the word hell, which may convey the idea of a place of torment, especially if the reader had been taught to think of hell in such a way. For example, Job 14:13 reads, "Oh, that thou wouldst hide me in the grave, Sheol," while Psalm 86:13 reads, "Thou hast delivered my soul from the lowest hell, Sheol." Since both words come from the Hebrew word Sheol, there's no reason why the translator should have used different words, unless they had a particular idea they wanted to convey. Job was asking that God hide him in Sheol. If Sheol were a place of torment, why would Job ask to go there? Job was asking that he be hidden in death because his trials were so difficult that being dead seemed better to him than continuing with his life. It would be very unlikely that Job would pray to God to hide him in a hell of eternal torment. Rather, it's described as a place of darkness, a place of silence, and a place of forgetfulness. The book of Ecclesiastes specifically states that there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge in the grave, Sheol, whither thou goest. So the true meaning of Sheol is a hidden state, which is applied to man's condition in death. It is particularly interesting to note that this same word Sheol is translated to grave 31 times, and to pit 3 times by the very same translators, which is more times than it is translated hell. In both of the instances when it is translated hell, scholars found it necessary to explain in the margins of modern Bibles that it actually means grave. Let's take a look at a few of the Old Testament scriptures where the word Sheol is translated hell. Psalm 139:8 says, "If I make my bed in hell, behold, thou art there." This scripture is telling us that God's power is unlimited, even over those in the grave. Proverbs 14:11 tells us, "Hell and destruction are before the Lord," making the association between the grave and destruction, not a life of torment. In Jonah 2, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly and said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me. Out of the belly of hell cried I, and thou heardest my voice." This is when Jonah was hidden in the belly of the fish, which was clearly not a fiery place of torture. The same word Sheol is also translated grave 31 times. Here are a few examples. Psalm 6:5 says, "In death there is no remembrance of thee. In the grave who shall give thee thanks?" And Psalm 31:7 even says that the wicked will be silent in the grave. There are 3 instances in the Old Testament where the word Sheol is translated pit, one of which is Job 17:16 that says, "They shall go down to the bars of the pit when our rest together is in the dust." The examples we gave are not all-inclusive, but it is evident that these verses do not have a single hint of hell of eternal torment. Let's take a closer look at the word hell in the New Testament. In the New Testament, the Greek word Hades corresponds exactly to the Hebrew word Sheol. We know this because in the New Testament there are times when the apostles are quoting scriptures from the Old Testament that use the word Sheol, and it is translated as Hades. For example, Acts 2:27 says, "Thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, Hades," which is a quotation from Psalm 16:10. The Greek word Hades is translated to hell 10 times in the New Testament. One example is in Matthew 11:23. "And thou, Capernaum, which are exalted unto heaven, shall be brought down to hell." The city of Capernaum had misused God's favors and was therefore destroyed. It didn't burn for all eternity. It was destroyed and therefore no longer exists. Revelation 20, verse 13 and 14 is particularly interesting. It says, "And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell, the grave, delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell, the grave, was cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death." The lake of fire is a picture of second death, not a literal place of fire and torment. And what is second death again? It is a final everlasting destruction that happens only to those who, after the 1,000-year kingdom, still refuse to follow God. But we also learn from this verse that death and the grave will be destroyed. 1 Corinthians 15:26 confirms that the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. In addition to Sheol and Hades, the New Testament also includes the term Gehenna, which is translated into hell 12 times. The term Gehenna is a geographical term meaning Valley of Hinnom, which is a literal valley just outside the city of Jerusalem. The reason why Gehenna was important to residents of Jerusalem is that it was the place that they took their garbage to be burned. All the city waste was emptied and burned there, and the fires were kept continually burning in order to utterly consume all things deposited there. Brimstone was also added to help with combustion and ensure complete destruction. It is important to note that no living creature was ever thrown into Gehenna, as the Jews were not allowed to torture any creature. The Valley of Hinnom, or Gehenna, was thus an illustration of second death, final and complete destruction, from which there can be no recovery, because after that there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. Knowing that the word Gehenna symbolizes second death, meaning complete destruction, we can read Revelation 19:20 with greater understanding. The scripture uses the picture, a lake of fire burning with brimstone, to which we can draw a parallel to Gehenna in the use of brimstone and fire. The scripture is using the literal Valley of Hinnom, which was continually burning, to illustrate a concept of complete non-existence. The use of brimstone adds greater meaning to the symbol of fire because it helps to strongly fuel a fire. Although we've only scratched the surface of this topic, we hope that we have helped you to consider a new understanding of the scriptural condition of hell. By looking into the words and meanings behind the concept of hell, we can see that nowhere in Scripture is hell shown to be a place of fire and everlasting torment. That concept does not fit into God's character or plan of salvation for all mankind. Hell is used in the Bible as a term used to represent death in its fullest and most complete sense. In the Old Testament, hell describes an unconscious state of death, and in the New Testament, it is referring to the second death, which is total and everlasting destruction that happens only to a very few who still refuse to serve God after the 1,000-year kingdom.